Respected Coordinator, Professor Pramod Kumar. Now before we start with our blend of meticulous pointer-end, I would like to introduce you with our distinguished speakers. Professor Sri Ratna Manandhar, Venerable Adhika Vamsa, Professor Anurag Chaudhary, Dr. K. Subramania, Professor Purushottam Millimoria. Now I hand over the mic to the respected chairperson, sir, for the session. Thank you.
I request the honorable speakers to confine themselves to 15 or so now I request the first speaker, Professor Manandhar, Vice Chancellor of Nandini University of Nepal, to give his talk.
Honorable Chair, His Excellency, distinguished speakers of the dais, and distinguished audience. First of all, let me congratulate the organizers of the conference for organizing such a significant event in Sachi. And I am very much delighted to be here with you to speak a few words before you. And I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak before you. Now, so far as the topic of my speech is concerned, day before yesterday, when we were taken to the university site at Sanchi, there were a number of boards explaining the functions and the activities of the newly founded university. And in one poster, I found the word, why this university? Why this university was founded? And in that word, 3 or 4 reasons were given. And one of the reasons given in that word was to strengthen Hinduism and Buddhism as a unifying factor to develop a country. So that was one of the objectives of this newly founded Sanchi University of Buddhist Indic Studies. Now the same is the objective of our university in Nepal, which is known as Lumbini Buddhist University, and which has been founded in the name of the birthplace of Lord Buddha at Lumbini. So first of all, please accept many greetings from Nepal, and especially from Lumbini Buddhist University, the university I belong to. So my brief speech, which the chair has given me 15 minutes, I want to speak on religious harmony in Nepal, which is in great need in today's Nepal, especially for the university like ours, Lumbini Buddhist University. So I would like to discuss this topic in its historical perspective, the present day scenario, and also some of the suggestions, my personal suggestions. So So to begin with, just back. Yes, yes. So now to begin with, Nepal is the birthplace of Lord Buddha, that is Lumbini. And from the very ancient period, both Hinduism and Buddhism flourished in Nepal in a most cooperative way. We do have Pashupati, which is the sacred Hindu temple, and we don't know when it was founded, long before. Then we have Swayambhu, the Buddhist shrine, which is supposed to have been founded even before the birth of Lord Buddha. Though the inscriptional evidences we do have about Swayambhu is dated back only to 14th century, founded long before. Then we have Swayambhu, the Buddhist shrine, which is supposed to have been founded even before the birth of Lord Buddha. Though the inscriptional evidences we do have about Swayambhu is dated back only to 14th century, only to 4th century AD. Similarly, we do have many Hindu sites in Nepal. For example, I would like to take only one name, and that is Janakpur, which is the kingdom of Janak, and also the birthplace of Sitaji. Similarly, we do have Tiruvannamalai, which we believe to be the capital city of ancient Tamil Nadu. Though there are some debates or some controversies about the capital city of ancient Tamil Nadu, where Siddhartha Gautama spent his 29 years, first 29 years. Then the kings of Nepal from the very beginning to 2006, when monarchy was abolished, all of them were Hindu, but they paid great respect to Buddhism. And one very interesting thing I would like to point out is that during the ancient period, one writer has recently written, neither there was Hinduism nor there was Buddhism. The king and the people belong to what he calls Shiva Buddha sect. So it is a kind of new term he has introduced. Neither they solely believe on Saivism nor on Buddhism. They worship and they do have faith on both the sects, and that's why he termed it as Shiva Buddha sect. And in Buddhism also, there was no distinction between the Mahayana and Theravada during the ancient period in Nepal. When the Chinese pilgrim Wei-Shan visited Nepal, he wrote that there are 2,000 Buddhist monks in Nepal, and all of them practice both greater and lesser Vedika. That means there was no distinction between the Mahayana and Theravada. And there was also no clear distinction between the Hinduism and the Buddhism. Both of them belong to what the writer calls Buddha Shiva sect. And during the ancient period, which we call the Likshmi period, there was complete religious harmony in the country, and we don't come across any kind of clash on the question of religion or on the question of culture. Then, from 8th century onwards, we do have a number of Indian Buddhist scholars present in Nepal, and mainly we can take the name of three persons, Padmasambhava, Sankarakshita, and Kamalasiva. Though these names are very famous in the history of India and also in the history of Tibet, they are forgotten so far as the history of Nepal is concerned. But they spent several years in Nepal, and they had interactions with the Tibetan Buddhist scholars so many times. And in a way, from 1st to 8th or 11th century, Nepal had become a meeting point of the Buddhist scholars of India and Tibet. And in which these Indian Buddhist scholars have played a very major role, and that has been actually ignored. Now, when in ancient period there was a kind of Saiva and Buddha sect. There are other sects, there were other sects also. For example, Shakti, Vaishnava, there are sects, but they are very minor. So, in the 14th century, the Nepalese king thought it very much essential to divide the population of Nepal into two categories, that is Shaivism and Buddhism. The whole society of Nepal was divided into Shaivism and Buddhism. But he protected the local Buddhist customs and manner in a very good way. Now, regarding the other religious groups, Muslims entered into the history of Nepal by the end of 15th century, and they carried on their business very well. And even up to this time, we have one bazaar in the city of Kathmandu, which we call Rakhi Bazaar. And it is a distorted form of Rakhi Bazaar actually. So the Muslims were very much successful in their business from the 15th century onwards. Then the Christians also showed their presence by the end of 17th century, but this time on their way to Tibet. And at first, the Christians were also given protection by the state, but later, when they were engaged more on conversion activities, they were expelled. Then by the end of 19th century, the different eastern states of Nepal were united into one God, and the new rulers were the Saharas, whose dynasty ended just years before, and they were the Hindus. But though they were the Hindus, they also gave equal importance to Buddhism. And there was one British diplomat in Nepal during the first half of the 19th century, and his name was Brian Hobson. And Brian Hobson has written that in the judicial court, if the accused is a Hindu, he had to take swear by putting his hand on Harivamsa. And if he was a Buddhist, he had to do so on Pancharaksha. And for a Muslim, Quran was given for his training. So the identity of Hindu and the Buddhist, along with the Muslims, have been clearly acknowledged. Now in 1954, the first school of Nepal was enacted. It was the first school of Nepal that was enacted in 1854. And that code gave equal importance to all the religious groups. It is said that every religion is great for an individual. So no one should interfere in the internal affairs of the religious affairs of others. So it gave equal protection to all the religious groups. And during the 20th century, during the first half of the 20th century, there were two events. And those two events were the expulsion of Buddhists from Nepal by the Prime Minister of Nepal. But here, I would like to say that these Buddhists were expelled from Nepal not on the instigation of the Hindus, but on the instigation of the Buddhist priests themselves. What happened was that some Tibetan Lama Gurus came to Nepal, and a number of Buddhists were attracted to those Lama Gurus. And the Buddhist priests, who were the Bhattacharya, they were afraid that once they come under the influence of these Tibetan Lamas, the Bhattacharya priests will forget. So on the instigation of those Bhattacharya, those Buddhist priests, these Buddhists were arrested. Similarly, after a few years, another Prime Minister took action against the Buddhists when they were involved in anti-Rana activities or anti-state activities. So it was not a clash between the Hindus and the Buddhists that led to the expulsion of the Buddhists from Nepal. Rather, it is on the instigation of the Buddhists themselves these events happened. Now, in 1961, the autocratic ruler of the Rana ended, and Nepal entered into a democratic period. And in 1959, the country adopted a parliamentary system, and the constitution was promulgated in 1959. And it was the first constitution of Nepal that clarified the state's policy toward religion. And that 1959 constitution says that 1959 constitution gave freedom to profess one's own religion without conversion. That means one was to profess his own religion as handed down from his forefathers, but the conversion was strictly prohibited. And that parliamentary system lasted only for 18 months, and from 1960 to 1990, there was a kind of absolute rule of the king, which we call the Panchayat system at the time, and the new constitution was promulgated in 1962, and that constitution, for the first time in the history of Nepal, declared the country is a Hindu state. Nepal was declared a Hindu state not on the basis or not because of the vast majority of Hindus. It was declared a Hindu state for the benefit of the monarchy. And one slogan was given: one institution, one religion, and one language. One institution means the institution of monarchy. One language means the Nepali language. And one religion means the Hindu religion. So, when the country was declared a Hindu state, naturally there was a gulf between the Hindu and Buddhist. And so many Hindu leaders, or even the king, began to describe Buddhism as a branch of Hinduism. And actually, it was opposed by the Buddhist population. So there was a kind of gulf was created after it was declared a Hindu state in 1960. And that's why, when there was the movement against the king's regime in 1990, one slogan was there, and the slogan was to declare Nepal a secular state. The 1990 movement was successful, but as compromise with the king, Nepal was still declared a Hindu state. But in 2006, another successful movement not only ended the monarchy, but also declared Nepal a secular state. Now the story did not end here. The Hindus considered the secular state as a pre-planned affair against the Hindus. And that's why they were demanding the revival of the Hindu state. That is the abolition of the secular state. And they were also demanding for a referendum to decide whether Nepal should remain a Hindu state or not. And in my opinion, the Hindu state can be revived. Because in 1960, it was declared a Hindu state not on the basis of any plebiscite or referendum. It was declared a Hindu state by only 4 or 5 people who were asked by the king to frame the constitution. So there was no question of the referendum or plebiscite. But in my mind, the word secular may be deleted from the constitution. Because when the country is not declared a Hindu state, it is certain that it is a secular state. But why to mention that secular state in the constitution? To give the example of Indian constitution itself, Indian constitution also doesn't have the word secular state in 1947 or 450. It was declared a secular state only in the 1970s. So that may be a kind of compromise between the Hindus and the Buddhists, and that's why, and so that the Hindus and Buddhists may remain in peace because, in Nepal, other religious groups are bound to remain in peace with the Hindus. Because there are a greater number of Hindus, more than 90% of the population are Hindus. Then other religious groups have adopted Hindu customs and manners. The Buddhists of Nepal also have adopted many Hindu customs and manners. And the country was ruled by the Hindu king for a longer period. And that's why my only conclusion is that they should remain in peace. They should remain in cooperation with one another, and so that the aim of our Buddhist university will be fulfilled, and we may be in a very comfortable position to impart the Buddhist education in comparison to Hindu ideas and practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Triratna. You wonderfully brought out the four teachings of different religions in Nepal. Actually, the Nepali society is so tolerant that we don't find so many communal rights as we find in India. So, on behalf of thank you very much for bringing out this fact.